Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Todd Klindt's SharePoint podcast number 245, recorded live in my basement, May 11th, 2015. I am your host, finally a very well-rested Todd Klindt. Before we get into all the great things that I have to talk about this week and why I was so gosh darn tired, we should all take a moment and go out to SharePoint.rackspace.com. Just point our browsers, whatever your favorite browser is, i.e. Chrome, Firefox, Netscape, Mosaic, whatever the browser is. Just go in there, go into your little title bar, and go to SharePoint.rackspace.com. That is the site where we hide all of the great things that we do with SharePoint at Rackspace. You'll find out about our dedicated offerings, our multi-tenant offerings, our services offering. We get videos and all kinds of great stuff. So go out to SharePoint.rackspace.com. Okay, for production notes, we did not do a show last week, and we're going to talk about why in just a moment. And because of that, in preparation for that, not because I'm lazy or disorganized, though I can understand why one would think that, because of Ignite last week, we didn't do a show. And so I kind of staggered the two shows that I'd done previously out a little bit so that there wasn't a big week gap. So the last one went out Thursday-ish, something like that. The hooligans in the chat room have made it very clear that I apparently misspoke. This is podcast 246. We've already done 245, and it was a good one, so I'm going to keep it. We're not going to redo 245. I like it the way that it was. So we've all decided. We've got a quorum vote here. We've all decided this one. We'll call this one 246. So make sure that's all clear. But for production notes, there wasn't a lot to do because I didn't do one last week. Had big ideas about doing some recordings at Ignite and just didn't do any of that. So you got a week off, but I kind of staggered them out. But this one will be right back to being timely. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whenever I normally get these things out. Other than that, it's been pretty good. All right, on. Lori's telling me no excuses. Thursday, not a moment later. So the big topic, the big thing I'm going to talk about this week is Microsoft Ignite. Holy cow, was that a big deal? So for those of you that haven't been following along or haven't been listening to the podcast, Microsoft Ignite was last week in Chicago. It was officially May 4th through the 8th, though I will tell you how some folks were able to squeeze an extra day out of that. But that was Microsoft's big conference this year. So Microsoft took all of the conferences they did before, big or otherwise, Tech Ed and the SharePoint conference and the Exchange conference and all those IT Pro type conferences. They put them all together in one gigantic conference called Microsoft Ignite. It was at McCormick Place in Chicago. I saw varying amounts of numbers, but the numbers that I heard repeated most often, and I think I read them on the internet, which automatically makes them true, is the show was sold out, and it sold out at more than 15,000 attendees. And then once you add the attendees and the speakers and the vendors and the Microsoft staff and a couple of stray cats, it got the number up to north of 23,000 people at this event. It was ginormous. It was huge, and it had everything. It was just, I can't say enough about how big it was. Before this, I think the largest conference that I'd been to had been a Tech Ed or a SharePoint conference that had been like 13,000 people, something like that. And I thought that was pretty cool. But this one was even more gigantic. So Vlad in the chat room is saying about 23,000 attendees plus 5,000 staff plus 5,000 sponsors. Boy, I don't know. I'd have to check that out. But suffice it to say, it was super, super duper big. And this was the inaugural Ignite. And that's important because there were some rough edges. And you're not gonna linger on the rough edges, but again, it's important to know that while some things weren't perfect, this was the first year. This was the first year that this group has done a conference this large, and it went pretty well considering all of that. But as you can imagine, the logistics of moving everybody around were amazing. Microsoft, when they announced Ignite a while back and they opened up the registration, they had deals with 70 hotels in downtown Chicago. 70. That is a lot of hotels. And the conference center is 4 or 5 miles south of the main downtown. So you couldn't really walk back and forth. I mean, you could take a lot of time, and it was kind of chilly and rainy a couple of days. But all the hotels were a significant jaunt north of the conference center. And that was, so because of that, transportation was rough. Now, in earlier years, like when this thing's been at Mandalay Bay or the Venetian or at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, any of those places, normally you could stay close enough to be able to walk. And I really like that, especially as a speaker, because I forget things. And, if I want to give books away, I have to remember those, or if I, wore the wrong pants or my socks didn't match, any number of reasons that I've needed to walk back to my room. That's been an option. This year, it was not an option because of a couple of things. Number one, just a long bus ride. If you got there a split second before the bus left on both ends, so you didn't ever wait on the bus, it was going to be a solid 15, 20 minutes each way. Now, they did do a cool thing where there's kind of a secret street that runs parallel to Columbus there in downtown Chicago. It's kind of underground, and that was reserved for the buses. So I was staying at the Swiss Hotel, caught the bus at the Hyatt Regency, and then the bus would go around the block and go into the secret bat entrance and go down on the secret street. And that was great because it got us away from the surface traffic, but it still took a good amount of time. And then one morning, I got on the bus, got to wait on the bus for a while, got to wait for 10 or 15 minutes because there's nothing better than sitting on a bus. That's awesome stuff, right? Who doesn't like to sit on a bus? So we sat on the bus at the hotel for a good 10 or 15 minutes. And then the bus driver, when she went around the block, she tried to go in the secret bat entrance and couldn't quite make the corner. So the corner was right around the thing, and she couldn't quite make the turn. But in her defense, she didn't give up. She probably tried for 5 minutes, wedging herself back and forth, trying to get herself around that corner, much to the chagrin of all the other people that were trying to get around that intersection. And then she finally gave up and drove surface streets. So that, so now we're like 20 minutes into the ride. And then she took surface streets, and that took another 20 minutes or so. And then when we got to the convention center, her instructions were how to park, understanding that she would come up out of the secret bat entrance, but she didn't because she took surface streets. So they were just driving around the conference center. We kept seeing all the buses and kept seeing the door, and she wouldn't stop. It was, so we spent a good 45, 50 minutes on the bus that morning. Good. It's good for me to practice that. Helps me practice my meditation and helps me all that so I can keep my blood pressure low. Did try to take a bunch of Ubers. I see people in the chat room talking about Uber. I'm a big fan of Uber. Whenever I travel, I take Uber whenever I can. For whatever reason, I could never get the Uber app to work on my phone. Now I've got a Windows phone, so you could, potentially that could be the problem. But I tried it at McCormick Place. I tried it at my hotel, and I tried it at one other place. And every single time, without fail, the entire week, every time I tried to do it, it would just come up and say that there was a network error or couldn't access server or couldn't access service or something like that. And I never, ever, not a single time got Uber to work. And everybody that I talked to that had a Windows phone, including Lori and I think Jeff Shuey and a few other folks, could never get it to work. So I would have loved to have ordered an Uber any number of times, but just didn't have the opportunity. I did take a lot of cabs. The other thing was not only was the convention center a long way from the hotel, but so were the parties. So you couldn't really walk to many of the parties. A few of them, but not a lot of them. And every night had 4 or 5 parties. I mean, I legitimately had one night I went to 4 different parties and could have gone to more, but just went home. And every night had 5 or 6. And the thing to keep in mind about that is those were just SharePoint parties. So not only were the SharePoint people there in force, but the Windows folks and the Exchange folks and all that kind of stuff. So there were just parties everywhere all over Chicago. It was crazy stuff. But overall, again, it was the inaugural Ignite. They've not had to deal with crowds that large before, and I think things went pretty well. Now, they've already announced that Ignite will be, so the conference next year in 2016 will also be Ignite, same song, second verse, and I'm positive that they will do things better. So I'm looking forward to that already, and it's going to be May 9th, through whatever 4 plus 9 is, 13th, May 9th through the 13th. So same deal. But overall, had a great time. Came home exhausted. I came home a day early. I came home on Thursday afternoon. I drove because it's like it's usually a 5-hour drive. Leaving Thursday afternoon, I got to enjoy my drive for a little longer than 5 hours. But it was just 5-hour drive. So I drove in on Saturday and picked Lori and Laura up at the airport, and we made our way downtown. And then Thursday afternoon, I headed home. Took a day off. There was only like half a day on Friday anyway, so I didn't miss a whole bunch of stuff. But so on to some more stuff. Met a bunch of new people. So every time I'm at a conference like this, the podcast before that, I always talk about, if you see me, come find me. I'll be at the Rackspace booth or my sessions. Come up and introduce yourself and say, hey. I bet like 20 people did that at Ignite. It was awesome. And every time somebody would do it, I would tell people, doing this podcast, especially tonight, we had some technical difficulties getting things going. This thing's a lot of work. I mean, it takes several hours a week, and Lori and I spend a lot of time. We have these technical difficulties. But every time somebody that I've never met before comes up and says, hey, I listened to your podcast, it's really helped me out, thanks for doing it, it makes it that much easier for me to, plow through all these difficulties. So it means the world to me, and I'm glad that I could help you guys. And that was good stuff. So thanks to all those people. I did have one interesting person that I wanted to bring up, and this is one of the best stories that I've ever heard. 5 years ago at Tech Ed New Orleans, Shane and I were doing a session. I don't remember which one it was, the upgrade session, something like that. And one of the ways that we warm the crowd up and bribe the crowd to get them excited is we play heads or tails, and then we give something away. Usually it's a book, something like that. And, the idea is we've got a coin, and, we'd have everybody in the audience who wants a book put their hand on their head or their tail, flip the coin. If we flip ahead, everybody with their hands on their heads, keep standing, and then whittle it down to 1 or 2 people, and then we give away the whatever. So 5 years, we've been doing this forever, been doing this 10 years probably. 5 years ago in New Orleans, we did it, and we're telling this, the thing I just told you. If you want to win the book, stand up, whatever. And somebody in the back raises her hand. She says, I'm in a wheelchair. I can't stand up. So we had never encountered that before. And in true Shane and Todd fashion, we just started making fun of her. So Shane, I mean, this is 5 years ago. I remember it happening, but I don't remember all the details. But essentially, we told her she couldn't win a book, but we gave her a little SharePoint 911 cow. So something like this cow right here. One of these little foam cows, SharePoint 911, adorable little critters. We gave her one of those to bribe her to keep from calling HR on us and getting us all kicked out. That happened 5 years ago. Okay, so now fast forward to Ignite on Wednesday. Shane and I are doing an upgrade session on SharePoint, and we're doing the same thing. We're doing heads or tails, and the room is packed. I mean, there's just people everywhere. There's not an empty seat in the house. Packed. And we get down to the end, and there's one guy left. He's, Shane flipped heads. The guy had his hand on his head. Shane's like, that guy there's the winner. And some woman holds up her hand, and she's like, I'm still here. I've got my hand. And she's short. We missed her. We both missed her. She was standing right next to the guy that was still standing up, and neither one of us saw her. So Shane's like, well, I guess we have to go again and have you two go. And I'm like, nah, we'll just give them both books. Honest mistake. And so she comes up afterwards to get her book. It's the same woman. She was the woman who'd been in the wheelchair 5 years ago, had some operations. I don't know what it was. Wasn't in a wheelchair this time. I know that much. It's a miracle she's cured. Hallelujah. So she tells us this story, and of course, we're appropriately embarrassed, and we feel horrible and all that. But she brings out the cow. She still has the cow. She has the cow with her. She has the cow that we gave her 5 years ago in her hand. It's got some beads on it. And she proceeds to tell us this fantastic story about how she got that cow from us 5 years ago, named it Pat the SharePoint Cow, and has been taking Pat all over the world for the last 5 years and taking pictures of Pat everywhere she went. Pat has been to Paris, Aruba, Ireland, Italy. Pat's going to Greece in a couple of months. Pat's been in New Orleans again. Pat has been all over the world. And Pat has a Facebook page. So if you go out to Facebook and search for Pat, last name The SharePoint Cow, and I put a link in the chat room, you can see all the places that this woman has taken this cow that we gave her 5 years ago because she couldn't stand up for heads or tails. That is the funniest, that we just could not believe that. So go out and make friends with Pat The SharePoint Cow on Facebook. She would love to have you. We thought that was awesome. So I think, she did get her book this time after waiting patiently for 5 years, and she does have the cow. So that was one of the greatest. I'd never heard that. Pat The SharePoint Cow. So I'm friends with Pat on Facebook. I highly recommend it. Pat's got a very exciting life. You could do worse than following Pat around the world. While I was there, I also did the SharePoint booth and met a lot of new folks at the SharePoint booth, or not the SharePoint booth, the PowerShell booth. So excited. So many things to talk about. We're at the PowerShell booth, so always have a great time with Ed Wilson, Hey Scripting Guy, and his wife, Teresa. Always very helpful, always very accommodating. So I spent a couple hours over there during the week chatting with people, answering questions, and just being a PowerShell groupie, because PowerShell's pretty cool. Had a great time there. Got lots of free stuff, got lots of swag there. Rackspace gave away some awfully cool swag. We had cool swag every day of the week, and I didn't get all of them because they were for the they were for the customers, not for me. But I snuck a couple either every day. So one of the things I got was this thing, and there's a bunch of these out there now. Everybody's giving them away, but it's a power brick. It's a rechargeable power brick. It's got blue LEDs. Everybody loves blue LEDs, right? I asked everybody does. But this thing's got one thing that's super cool on it. It's got a charger. So when you charge it, you don't need a cable. You just plug it in, and then it charges itself up, and you take it with you, and it charges your cell phone. It's pretty cool. So I got one of those. We had other things. We gave away little Bluetooth speakers. We had a couple other things. We had some great stuff. There was some great swag there. I got a ton of t-shirts, whether I wanted them or not. One of the coolest giveaways was Monday night. They had Ask the Experts, which is where my awesome shirt comes from. So let me model this for you. On the back, it says expert. There's no great way for me to show you the back without, violating some sort of rules on that. But so I was working the SharePoint booth there. So it was, SharePoint and Office 365 and all that. One of the things that the Microsoft folks were giving away at the developer booth was Raspberry Pis. So this is a Raspberry Pi B2. This is one of those it's a little $35 computer. And I'll pull it out here quick, show it to you. It's a little hobbyist thing. It's a thing to learn how to program on and all that. And this is what it looks like inside of its thing. So again, $35 normally, and Microsoft was giving them away. God bless them. It's got an Ethernet port. It's got 4 USB ports. It's got an HDMI out port. It's powered with USB, so it's got a micro USB. It's got a headphone jack there, and it's got a micro USB thing there for storage, and then it's got some jumpers for connecting displays and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So they were giving those away. Now, it was at the developer booth because they wanted you to develop on it. Normally, these things run versions of Linux, and Raspbian is the version that you normally run on. You put the image on the card, boot up the card and all that. But what was important about this is recently Microsoft has announced that Windows 10 will run on this. There's going to be a version of Windows 10 for Internet of Things, IoT. Windows 10 will run today on this Raspberry Pi. You can go out to GitHub. There's a GitHub project for that. And it walks you through putting the Windows 10 image on a card, booting it off of that. And it was, it's great. So that was cool. I don't know what I'm going to do with it because I'm not a developer, but I went out all over the internet, and there are tons of places that have great Raspberry Pi projects on them. Probably the coolest one that I saw, which I have nowhere near the amount of technique for, is this one called Magic Mirror. And Magic Mirror is a project that a guy did with the Raspberry Pi. He made a client on there that went out and got like the weather and the time and his email and stuff like that. So kind of like my phone looks with the glance screen, has all of his stuff. And he hooked it up to a display and mounted it behind the mirror in his bathroom. And he got a two-way mirror like we see in all the CSI shows and NCIS and all that. And when the mirror is when the monitor is behind the mirror and it's off, it's invisible and it's just a mirror. But as soon as you turn the monitor on, then it shows all that information. It's built into the mirror. Magic mirror. Coolest thing ever. I will never be able to build one, but I would love to have something like that. And you can get those. You can get those pre-made. They're really super expensive, but that was one of the great projects that I've seen at the Raspberry Pi. But you can get all kinds of sensors, and it's a lot of fun. Microsoft gave away a lot of those, and that was awesome. There were a lot of parties that I went to. Again, had 3 or 4 parties every night, and just could not. And again, since the conference center wasn't by the hotel, I couldn't go back during the day and take a nap or just recharge a little bit. Being on and being in crowds all day just makes me exhausted. So I didn't end up staying out as late as I wanted to every night just because I needed a break. But there were a couple of cool parties I wanted to talk about. The folks at Petri.it had a party, and that's folks like Jeff Hicks and obviously Petri, and I think Jeff James and Paul Thurrott is recently there. So they had a party that was within walking distance at the conference center, and it had real food. Thank goodness for that. But they were giving away mugs, so I got one of those. And this is Paul Thurrott's new site since he went out on his own, and he was giving those away to the first 500 people or whatever. So I got one of those, and then it's got the Petri thing on the back. So that's kind of cool. And then another party that we went to, and I think this was Tuesday night, one of the many parties Tuesday night, Wednesday night, I don't remember, was Harmony and Metalogix had a party. And like Harmony does every year, they award their top 25 influencers in SharePoint and Office 365. And once again, I was fortunate enough to be on that list. I was number 17 this year, and I see that this makes horrible video because you can't see the thing. Let's see if this helps. So there you go. You can kind of see it. So they give away these acrylic cubes, and I've got a bunch of these things. I think this is the 4th year they've done it, and I've gotten one every year. So that was great. Now, I will be completely honest. There's a whole bunch of ego stroking and other things, but it's still kind of cool. And it's cool that they do it. And obviously it's great marketing for them because they get 25 people that have a lot of blog readers and Twitter followers talking about them. So it works out well for them, but it's kind of cool for us. I don't do this stuff for the recognition. I don't blog or podcast or anything, but every once in a while, I don't mind somebody patting me on the head and telling me good job. And I think, so I appreciate those guys. So the shout out to the Metalogix folks and Harmony. That was good stuff. And then that same night, I believe Tuesday night, was the AvePoint Red Party. Words can't describe how over the top the AvePoint Red Party is. They always are. And this year was no exception. It was at the Chicago Union Station. The place was massive. The line to the bathroom was massive. Everything about this thing was massive. And they had dancing and mute. It was crazy. As Lori's pointing out, the line for the bathroom was only for the gentlemen. The ladies had a much better bathroom experience, and that's pretty common for tech events. So I was not terribly surprised by that. But those guys they do parties right. AvePoint always just goes way over the top, and this was no exception. So overall, I think Ignite was a rousing success. I had a blast, and so now we're going to kind of go some of the individual things. So first off, I did 2 sessions at Ignite this year. On Sunday, Laura Rogers and I did a pre-con all day long, 7 hours, 6 hours after breaks, of content on OneDrive for Business. So all day long, we talked about OneDrive for Business. And when we first got assigned that session, I wasn't sure how that would go. It went really well. We had a lot of great discussion. We did not run out of time or content. We were kind of worried that we would run out of all the cool things to talk about and have a lot of time left over, but we didn't. We had exactly the amount of time that we needed. We timed it perfectly. Had a lot of great discussion from people in the audience, which was good. I mean, obviously those sessions cost $500 to come that extra day. And so only people that showed up, only people that were interested would show up. But we had a lot of really great discussions around OneDrive for Business and what it means to be doing hybrid and how to do authentication pieces and things like that. It was a great session. And hopefully the attendees learned a lot. I know I learned a ton getting prepared for it and going through the demos and doing all that kind of stuff. But it has also served to really get me excited about what the hybrid options are for SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2010 even, and going forward to SharePoint 2016. So that was a great session. So thanks to Laura on that. She did a whole lot of work. She, along with doing all the technical stuff that she did and all the technical research and things like that, she went through and made all my slides in PowerPoint not look terrible. I have an uncanny ability to make any PowerPoint slide look like ass. And so I would go in there and I would say, okay, Laura, we would do the co-authoring thing and we would be working together and say, okay, Laura, I went in and added slides, 65 through 69. They look terrible. Do your thing. And like magically before my eyes, all the fonts would look good and everything would be resized and she would find just the right picture. So, and that was all above all of the technical things that she had to do, the research and all that, making her own slides and making them pretty. So thanks go out to Laura for that. That session would not have been as big of a success as it was had she not gone above and beyond. So I appreciate that. Now we're going to talk later about how you can get some of the content from Ignite. The pre-con sessions were not recorded, and as far as I know, that information is not available online anywhere. So folks in the chat rooms, they're saying, okay, well, here's the deal about OneDrive for Business. You get storage. Now we have 6 hours and 55 minutes for questions. One of the things so I did this same session, this OneDrive for Business session last year at Tech Ed, 75-minute session. And I felt like I did a good job in 75 minutes. But when Microsoft approached us about doing it this year, they said, we liked that session a lot. It was really helpful. We had a lot of people there. Do that same session, but do it deeper. And that was really great. So, when I did the 75-minute session, I basically said, hey, you got to get your authentication set up. Here's the name of the tools. Go figure that out. Sunday, I was able to say, you need to get your authentication figured out. Here are all of your options. Here are all the reasons why you would do it. Here's kind of what it looks like. Now let's just go in and set it up, and we could do live demos with it. And I could show the PowerShell that you use to manage it. And I could explain all the different pieces and all the things that I've learned over the last year playing with it. So I was able to go a lot deeper with that. Laura was able to show some great end user things, figuring out where content is that you might want to put up into OneDrive for Business, SharePoint Online. So we just really got to dig into the meat of some of the stuff. So that was good. And yes, we did have 4 slides on sync issues. 5 slides on sync issues, 4 slides on stuff that we know will break sync, and then 1 slide on just general sync troubleshooting. That's getting better. They're getting there. But that was a great session. And that's fueling my fire for some of the hybrid stuff. The other session I did was Wednesday morning, and that was upgrading from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013. And I brought my old partner in crime, Shane, got him up on stage, and we got the band back together. We insulted some short people, giving away books, and then we got in there, and that session was really well. As with many sessions at Ignite, the room was packed. That was one of the things that they didn't have down exactly right, was how big the rooms needed to be. And so we had, there was, 200 or 300 people in the room. I have no idea how many people that room held. And then another 60 or 70 hanging out back. And I felt really bad for them. But that did give me an opportunity because they were very vocal on Twitter. People who are unhappy love Twitter. And a lot of people went and said, hey, I wanted to go see Todd's session on Upgrade, and the room was full. Boo, Ignite. So that gave me the opportunity, and several people took me up on it. I said, hey, I'm going to be at the Rackspace booth this afternoon. Come down, and we will talk about everything you want to talk about Upgrade. And we had a couple of people come by and do that, and that was good. So that gave me the opportunity to connect with people and make sure that they got what they were looking for out of the session, even though they couldn't get in. But again, you can go out online. If you go to channel9.msn.com and go up to the top and go to events, Ignite is in there, and you can look at all the events and so view the video and the slides from my upgrade session. It particularly is BRK3115, though it's just as easy on the right-hand side to go out and find my name as a speaker and then filter because there's only one session there. But that one went really well too. That one, that was a very comfortable pair of shoes. I've done that session a bunch of times. I've done it with Shane a bunch of times. The rhythm was there. The flow was there. It was well worn. So that session went well too. Now, there were tons of sessions at Ignite besides mine that were good. I know it's tough to believe. And I went to a couple myself. One of the biggest, most well-attended ones was a little session called What's New for IT Professionals in SharePoint Server 2016. Bill Bear, friend of the show, senior product manager at Microsoft for SharePoint, put that one on. It was in like a big auditorium. I think that room sat 4,000 or 5,000 people, something like that. It was gigantic. And so basically it was Bill telling us everything that he could tell us about what's going to come new in SharePoint 2016. Now, I've got a bunch of things here. We're already over time, and I got a bunch of other things to talk about, but I'm just going to kind of go over the highlights of what was in that. We'll have more of that coming up, in later podcasts as SharePoint 2016 is coming out. So we kind of walked through a bunch of pieces, again, a full 75-minute session on it. One of the greatest things I saw was when he was installing it. There is still a single server install, still the kitten killing install, the basic install from the days of old, but they've changed it. It no longer does all the horrible things that it used to do. So it used to install SQL Express and run everything as local accounts and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't do that anymore. It installs SharePoint in the single server mode, but you still need to install SQL yourself. You still need to set up your user accounts, things like that. So that was good. No more kittens will be harmed in the installation of SharePoint. There was much applause and laughter over that. Another thing that we saw during install was this idea of min role. And min role kind of reminded me of the job server definitions we had back in SharePoint 2003. But min role is this idea that when you're installing SharePoint, you can install it to specific roles. Web server was one, search was one, job server was one, or task server, I can't remember what it was called, was one. And SharePoint will only install the bits necessary for that. And so there's some advantage to that. And then, of course, you still have the whole custom role, which is what we essentially have now. And that's you turn it whatever on you want. But the idea behind that is smaller footprint, so smaller surface area, smaller attack vector, also less things to patch because there's fewer things running on there. So I'm not quite on the min role bandwagon yet, but I'm getting closer. And the idea behind mid role would be if you had a farm that was already set up and functioning and you needed another search server, you would run the install, pick the search server min role. It would install only the search pieces and then turn all the search pieces on for you when that was done. So that was good. One of the things that Bill talked about was there is no upgrade from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2016. That had been floated around a little bit. He had thrown one tweet out about that and then deleted it. But there is no upgrade from SharePoint 2010 to 2016. You have to come from SharePoint 2013, which again is always how it's been. You've always only been able to upgrade from N-1, so that was kind of nice. And he also mentioned that the upgrade, once again, will only be database attach upgrades. No in place, any of that kind of stuff, only database attach upgrades. Another thing that he talked about was FIM is out as part of the user profile service. So that's kind of gone full circle, kind of weird. So in SharePoint 2007, we had SharePoint Sync, which was read-only from AD, very limited, but very fast, all that kind of stuff. SharePoint 2010 comes out. It's only FIM-based. The user profile service had a lot of problems with it. Really clumsy, really clunky. SharePoint 2013 comes out, and it's got both SharePoint Sync and the FIM-based sync. And now SharePoint 2016 comes out, and it's back to where we were SharePoint 2007. It's only the SharePoint Sync. But it looks like it will have support for external FIM if you want to go that route. When he first showed that slide, I was excited. I'm like, yeah, about time. But then it occurred to me that SharePoint 2013's kind of got the best of both worlds because you've got the choice. You can do either one. And that's really, I like having options. But that option's gone. So FIM is out in SharePoint 2016. It's back to the SharePoint only sync. One of the things that Bill hit hard was that the patching story is going to get better, which he talked about a lot when he was on my podcast a while back. And I can't remember which number that was. But they're really spending a lot of time focusing on patching. He is promising a no downtime patching, so I'll be excited to see that. when that happens. But that's the idea, that there will be no downtime patching. The patches will be smaller. They will be more laser focused on the things that need to be patched. But we'll see more about that coming up. But again, Microsoft's been running SharePoint Online for a few years now. They are having all the same problems that we had, and they want it to go away as much as we do. The difference is they can actually fix it, and I think they are. So that's a good one. Another thing that Bill mentioned that will be new to SharePoint 2016 is a whole bunch of limits have been expanded, database limit size and number of rows and views and all that kind of stuff, but also 10 gigabyte file uploads. No longer are we shackled to the 2 gigabyte file upload. Now, I've never really thought that SharePoint was a great place for files over 2 gig, even though there have been a couple of times when I've wanted to put files that were over 2 gig in there. But they officially will support 10 gig uploads into SharePoint 2016. And like Lori said, there was much rejoicing over that. So I don't know the specifics of that, if it's going to go into SQL or if it's going to have to go to some RBS provider or something, but 10 gigabyte file uploads. Another thing that Bill talked about in kind of depth was how file transfers between the web front end and the SQL boxes and all that kind of stuff, how that's going to be changing. They're not going to use Cobalt anymore, which is how they used to bring the Office documents in, work your changes in, things like that. And they're going to more of a bit style thing. So they already got the traffic between the user and the web server kind of, shortened down, but now they're trying to get that traffic between between SharePoint servers and between the SQL server down. One of the things they talked about with the min-roll piece was if you used min-roll, they would try to keep all of the user traffic on one box if at all possible, as opposed to, web front end and application server and traffic bouncing around, that if you used min-roll everywhere, they would keep as much of your traffic on one server as possible, which was kind of nice. Another thing that he talked about was this idea of durable links. And that means that the link to a file, the link to a document inside of SharePoint will not change or will still work if the file is renamed, which is interesting. And the link will still work if the file is moved to another site collection of the web, whatever. So he didn't show that. He didn't demonstrate that. He didn't talk a lot about what that looked like on the back end. I can only imagine that means that files are going to have some kind of unique identifier, GUIDs of some variety in the background. But that was a good thing. So now you don't have to worry about, losing files. If the file's still there, it's still going to work. So I'm curious to see that. So Bill's session was very good. I recommend you go out to Channel 9 and watch it. And that one, that session was, I've got it up there. Again, if you can go to Bill Bear and look for him as a speaker, but it's BRK 2188. So there were a bunch of other SharePoint sessions. I didn't go to a lot of them. I went to a couple. One of them was one that Mark Cashman did at the end of the week. He did it Friday morning. It was called SharePoint Unplugged. And essentially, he just tried to answer a lot of questions and things that were brought up. That one's kind of cagey. It's not on Channel 9 anymore. You can't find it, but the video's still out there, so I'll have a link to that in the show notes. It was BRK 2206. Mark's a good guy, part of the SharePoint team there at Microsoft. But he talked about a couple of things in there. Well, actually, a bunch of stuff. But one of the things that was interesting that he brought up was during the Q&A, somebody asked, will there be a SharePoint Designer 2016? And his answer was, no, that's an easy one. There will not be a SharePoint Designer 2016. So you've heard it here first. Well, probably not first, but you've heard it here officially. SharePoint Designer 2013 will be the last version of SharePoint Designer. But the good news is that SharePoint Designer 2013 is still free. That has not changed. And his reasoning was pretty solid. I think we all kind of saw it coming. SharePoint Designer 2013 doesn't do design anymore. It's, they've taken that out. And it does workflow stuff, and there's kind of other ways to do workflows. I think there's going to be more in-browser options for workflows. Still going to be able to do workflows with Visual Studio. Lord help your soul. But SharePoint Designer is just not going to work anymore. And But what they have, are not going to get updated, but what they have said is much like SharePoint Designer 2013 works with Office 365 now, it looks like SharePoint Designer 2013 will work with SharePoint Server 2016 when that comes out. Daniel Glenn in the chat room is also saying that that Mark alluded to the fact that a group in Microsoft is working on help with an info path replacement. And that is something that has been trying to get figured out. So for a while, that was the fossil thing, the forms on SharePoint lists. There's just been a bunch of things. Microsoft hasn't completely figured out where they're going with that, but they're still trying to figure that out. So there is hope. They don't know what for, but they're figuring something out. Another session that I sat in, and Bill talked about this at his session 2, but there's going to be an update to SharePoint 2013 coming later this year, and this is also functionality that will be native in SharePoint 2016, and that is the idea of a cloud search service application. And that is one of the problems with hybrid is if you've got search set up for hybrid, which you can do, and you can do a two-way search so that on-prem results show up with Office 365 results in Office 365, and Office 365 results show up in on-prem searches, but it's a federated search, so they show up separately. You don't get the relevance, and it's just a very jarring experience. So coming out sometime this year, there will be an update, an cumulative update for SharePoint 2013, will be support for a cloud search service application. And that search service will export your index, your on-prem index, up to Office 365. And then when you do queries in Office 365, it will include your Office 365 and on-prem data, but in such a way that it will be able to do things like relevance and all that kind of stuff. And it's pretty cool. And then you can also go the other way, so you can do both directions. It will do queries also. But the interesting thing about that is once your on-prem data is in Office 365, then all of the cool Office 365 tools like Delve and Office Graph and all that stuff work with your on-prem data. And Craig Janke in the chat room is talking about there was a session on that, and there was a session on that, and I watched it today, and I didn't have a link to it in here. But yes, there's a session for all of that talks about how all that's going to work together. So again, sometime this year, we'll get it for SharePoint 2013, and it will be native to SharePoint 2016. And when I do the show notes, I'll put a link to that session in the show notes. Speaking of all of that, for those of you that weren't able to make it to Ignite, or those of you who were able to make it to Ignite and were just too darn hungover to go to sessions the next day, like has been happening to many, many events in the past, you can download any of the Ignite content, except for the pre-cons and except for the SharePoint Unplugged, all that, at Channel 9. So go to channel9.msdn.com. You can go to /events/Ignite/2015, or go up to the top right, Events, Ignite, and that will take you right there. Every session is there, except for the ones that I mentioned. Videos of it, so you get to hear it all. The slide decks that came with it, it's all there. Will be there for a long time. I highly recommend just going out there, doing some searches for keywords and all that, and just absorbing all of that you can. There's so much good stuff out there. And if you would like to hear what Lori Gowan's voice sounds like, the producer, the executive producer, senior executive producer of the podcast, you can go out there. She has a session out there that she did with Laura Rogers on Friday about making the most out of SharePoint. So go out and find that one. You'll be able to hear what her voice sounds like. You don't get to see any video because it's slides and demos, but you'll get to hear her voice. Now, I understand that going out to a web interface and clicking things and searching and all that is such a pain. Sometimes you just want it all locally. You've got 200 gig of drive space just sitting there looking for stuff. As has become a great tradition, there have been many PowerShell scripts written now that will download every session from Ignite. And my favorite, I think that's the right one. I'll have to look and see. There's a bunch of them out there. I hope I just gave you the link to the right one. But Vlad Castranescu, my Canadian friends, I think that's the one. I think I linked the wrong one, maybe. So Vlad, if you're still in the chat room, link yours up, and I linked the wrong one. Sorry about that, Vlad. So Vlad in the chat room, link your script, and I will put that in my show notes. It's the one that I meant to put in here. But Vlad wrote this PowerShell script that will download every single video and every single PowerPoint from Ignite. Last time I saw him mention it, it was about 150 gig of stuff, something like that. And that's a lot. So one of the things, after much demand, Vlad added an ability to only get things that match keyword searches, so you can only get certain stuff, things like that. So I will put the link to that in the chat room. It looks like Vlad's in the chat room, but he must not. Either the lag's gotten to him or something. And I know that. So that's Vlad from SharePoint Community. .com, but I'll have a link to that. So if you didn't get there and you want to get some of that content, you can grab it that way. And I highly recommend that. And especially if you download my session, get in there, and on the Channel 9 site, you can rate it. You can add comments, things like that. And I appreciate that. Okay. So maybe, all right. So that's a different, okay. So Vlad's script is at gallery.technet.com. .microsoft.com, and it's a URL that's a horrible URL to try to say out loud. So go to the show notes, go to toddklindt.com/podcast 246, and you'll see the link to Vlad's thing. And I'm going to put it in my show notes so that I don't forget. I have done that before and forgotten. So that's there. So then after I did it, Lori's like, no, I already did it. I wasn't even paying attention. So now Vlad's URL has been pasted into my notes twice, so I'm certain that it's going to get it. So that's good. I've done this for a lot of conferences, downloaded all the sessions, and then when I'm waiting for SharePoint farms to build or something, I'll throw something on the background. It's a great resource, and I'm glad that people write those scripts, and I'm glad that Microsoft has allowed them to do it, because that's got to be a hell of a strain on their download stuff. So that's something that I'm glad that they support. So overall, again, Ignite was a great success and had a blast. Thanks to every single person that I talked to, and a bunch of people in the chat room here that I saw at Ignite. I had a blast. I've been traveling a lot, and Ignite was super crowded and super busy and super noisy. And I think it probably would have driven me crazy if it hadn't been for all my friends that were there. So every one of you that came up and hung out with me, I appreciate it. Every one of you that tracked me down and said, hey, you don't know me. I'm kind of creepy. I follow you on the internet. Don't feel bad at all. I was glad to talk to every single one of you. And hopefully everybody that I talked to felt that, because it's easy to get busy and all that. And I hope everybody walked away feeling that I was glad to have met them, because I was every single time. So we got that. All right. So now I've got some other topics and stuff, but I'm going to save some stuff for next week. I got a couple of things. So next week, a very special thing's going to happen. I don't want to give it away. Was going to do it this week, but the person that involves one of the netcast or podcast hooligans. And I was asked to wait till next week till this hooligan could appreciate it in person. So we got some other stuff to talk about next week. So we'll go on to shameless self-promotion. Running out of stuff. Almost all the conferences are done this year. So we got a couple of things. I think, I don't have to look at this. Yeah. So I think May 28th, I'm speaking at the Alaska SharePoint user group. And that's going to be online. I'll put the URL out for that. And that is www.akspug.org. I'll be doing that for them, talking about some hybrid stuff and stuff I saw at Ignite. You don't have to be in Alaska to join that. You can just go out there, and it's an all online deal. So feel free to sign up for that. And then on August 11th, I will be speaking for the Mississippi PowerShell user group. Haven't decided for sure yet what I'm going to speak about for those guys. There's a lot of things happening between now and then, but it's going to be something fun that I'll be doing for them. And finally, oh my goodness, There we go. SharePoint is September 18th and 19th, and I will be presenting there. Again, haven't decided what I'm going to be presenting at there, but we'll be doing that. That's down in Branson. You can go to SharePointAlooza.org and find out all about that. We'll also probably be speaking at SP TechCon in Boston in August, but haven't nailed all that down. I need to talk to Dave Rubenstein and get that all figured out too, so I can see my friends in Boston. So it went horribly long tonight. I apologize, but so many exciting things to talk about from Ignite. So I'm going to be in the chat room for a while. You guys can stick around. You guys online, thanks for listening. As always, you can hit me up at Todd Klindt. You can email me at todd.klindt@rackspace.com. Love to hear your feedback. Love to get your emails. Hopefully I respond to all of them that I get. I try super hard. But thanks to everybody. And we're going to go for 2 in a row. I'm going to try to do this thing 2 weeks in a row. So I will see you guys here next week. Thanks. Have a good night.